A number of books have come out in the past couple of years dealing with living a certain way based upon, in one case, one fellow wanted to live in terms of the Bible, both basically the Old Testament, and for a year wrote a book about it, wrote a book about his experiences. Ed Dobson, who's a pastor up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and in fact was involved with the Moral Majority back in the 1970s, wrote a similar book based upon the New Testament. So they essentially took the operating assumptions of the Old Testament and lived out the implications of that worldview. And then Ed Dobson did the same thing with the New Testament. It was a very interesting experiment. And I've always wondered what a book would be like if you took an atheist who would live consistently with the operating assumptions of atheism. I remember a television show that was on a long time ago, back in the 1950s, called Queen for a Day, where women would come on the show and they would tell their sad stories, and then the audience would vote on who had the saddest story, and they would make her queen for a day. And so you wonder what atheism would look like, a worldview that was consistent with atheism would look like. Now, I know that atheists and evolutionists do not like to be compared to people, say like Adolf Hitler, that is, take the basic operating assumptions of an atheistic worldview, of say Marxism, and work those out consistently in the world in which we live. Atheists are really living within the context of a Christian worldview, and they borrow the basic assumptions of Christianity and live in terms of those assumptions. And so I wouldn't want to be blamed for the outworking of an atheist like a Lenin or a Stalin or a Mao Zedong or an Adolf Hitler. Just because someone shares a similar ideology with a tyrant does not mean that he shares the outworking of that ideology. Just because an atheist is an atheist doesn't mean that he is going to live a consistent atheist life. And it's not that atheists generally are any more immoral than religious people because of their atheistic beliefs. Richard Dawkins is a case in point. He's really not consistent with his atheism. And so what I want to do today is to kind of push the antithesis with the atheistic worldview, taking the basic assumptions of atheism and showing where they lead if in fact people were consistent with them. This came to mind as I was reading a new book by William Dembski, The End of Christianity, Finding a Good God in an Evil World. And of course I've always pushed this idea that if atheism is true, can anything in fact be right or wrong? And he has a particular statement early in the book where he says, for hundreds of millions of years, multi-celled animals have been emerging, competing, fighting, killing, parasitizing, torturing, suffering, and going extinct. Now, were these actions by multi-celled animals morally wrong in their struggle for survival? If they weren't then why are they morally wrong now? See, if evolution is the struggle for life, where the strong domineer the weak and actually push the weak out, even literally consuming them, and if that's how we got to this evolutionary point in our lives, then why does it change? Why do the strong not have an ascendancy over the weak today? The History Channel is running a series called World War II in high definition, and I saw a commercial for it where one soldier tells the story about how he looked into the open eyes of a dead soldier and at that point became an atheist. But at that moment, his moral aversion to war should have been ended. He was staring into the light receptors of a bag of meat and bones that had short-circuited just one of millions of multi-celled animals that died at the hands of other bags of meat and bones that still had their electrical circuitry operating. There is no morality to it all. It's evolution in action. The strong survived. And so what this soldier, who once was a believer in God, brought to the war was a Christian worldview. Once he got to the war, he saw death on the battlefield, looked into the eyes of death, gave up his Christianity, but in doing so, he had to give up the very idea that war is a bad thing. He saw the weak being defeated on the battlefield and the strong surviving. Now, Richard Dawkins regards belief in a God who does not exist as the root of all evil. Of course, there is no way for him to prove that God does not exist, and given his understanding of how the world works, he can't even account for an entity that he calls evil. Now, Richard Dawkins, as an atheist, as an evolutionist, can really not say whether one thing is evil or not. If nature, red in tooth and claw, got us to this place, then who is to say that the same methods of survival are no longer in operation from this point forward? And Dawkins himself says as much in his book, River Out of Eden. He says, in the universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt and other people are going to get lucky. And you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. As that unhappy poet A.E. Housman put it, for nature, heartless, witless nature, will never know nor care. And then Dawkins concludes, DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. So, some soldiers are going to get hurt, and other soldiers are going to get lucky. Now, that's the way life is, according to Dawkins, the consistent atheist. There is no reason for any of it. Consider Francis Crick. Crick was the co-discoverer with James Watson of DNA's double helix. In his book, The Astonishing Hypothesis, he begins this book with this astonishing hypothesis. He says that your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. As Lewis Carroll's Alice might have phrased it, you're nothing but a pack of neurons. And of course, that's what we are in the evolutionary scheme of things. So on the battlefield, one pack of neurons is fighting another pack of neurons, and no one can come in, no arbiter, no umpire, no moral coach can come in and say, this bag of moral neurons is wrong in attacking this bag of neurons. This is the problem with the atheistic worldview. Fortunately for us, of course, Dawkins and his fellow atheists are not consistent, not thoroughly consistent with their moral worldview. It's a philosophy of life that resides in the stratosphere, and we are fortunate for that. Unfortunately, however, there are lots of people out there, of course, who live consistently or have lived consistently with that atheistic worldview, and fortunately there has been a Christian worldview out there that has judged them. And so what you find here is that the atheist really does not have an answer for life. So Richard Dembski emailed Dawkins to ask him if he was aware that a lot of the basic assumptions that Hitler used about Christianity and about its eradication are very similar to his own. And this is what Dawkins wrote back. You ask whether I was aware of the Hitler quote when I made my own statement. The answer is no, but I have become aware of it more recently in the course of investigating Hitler's religious beliefs. This is Dawkins' problem. He does not have an answer to the corrupting influence of the worldview of Adolf Hitler. His is identical to it.